Where did you get this? Answer me right now. You know it's illegal to have an open container, especially with this.
Two white police officers on a deserted highway. One black woman standing between them. A green bottle raised like a weapon. And a badge that would change everything. What you're about to witness isn't just another traffic stop gone wrong. This is the moment when institutional racism collided with institutional power. When two officers who thought they were untouchable discovered they'd just made the biggest mistake of their careers. She stood there calmly, hands visible, voice steady. They had no idea who she was. No idea that the woman they were humiliating, threatening, and violating had the authority to dismantle their entire department. No idea that every word, every action, every abuse of power was being cataloged by someone who'd spent 20 years studying the very system they were weaponizing against her. This is the true story of Judge Sarah Mitchell, and this is the traffic stop that exposed everything.
Judge Sarah Mitchell woke up at 5:47 a.m. on Tuesday, September 12th, the same way she had for the past 15 years, with purpose, discipline, and the weight of responsibility that came with her black robe. At 52 years old, Sarah had earned everything she had. Raised in Montgomery, Alabama by a single mother who cleaned houses to put her through college, Sarah remembered every sacrifice, every late night, every moment of doubt that nearly convinced her to quit law school. She remembered being the only black woman in her graduating class at Yale, the only black associate at her first law firm, the only black candidate considered for the federal judgeship she now held. Her chambers were located in the Northern District Federal Courthouse, where she presided over cases ranging from civil rights violations to federal corruption charges. She was known, respected, and by some feared for her razor-sharp legal mind and her absolute intolerance for injustice in any form. But on this particular Tuesday morning, Sarah wasn't thinking about courtrooms or case files. She was thinking about her mother. Grace Mitchell had passed away 3 years earlier, but her birthday was today. Sarah had taken the afternoon off, something she rarely did, to drive 2 hours north to Montgomery to visit her mother's grave, to sit in the small cemetery where generations of her family rested, and to remember. She dressed simply, a navy blue cardigan, jeans, comfortable flats, no judicial robes today, no briefcase filled with legal documents, just a daughter going to honor her mother. Sarah slid behind the wheel of her silver Honda Accord, a modest car for a federal judge, but Sarah had never been interested in flash or status symbols, and pulled on to Interstate 65 North just after 7 a.m. The highway was mostly empty, the morning sun casting long shadows across the Alabama countryside. Sarah's mind wandered as she drove. Memories of her mother's laugh, the smell of her cooking, the way she'd say, "Baby girl, you're gonna change this world someday." Had she? Sarah wondered. She'd sent corrupt politicians to prison. She'd ruled in favor of marginalized communities. She'd written legal opinions that set precedent for civil rights cases across the district. But driving past the cotton fields and small towns that dotted the highway, Sarah felt the familiar weight of how much hadn't changed, how much still needed to. She was so lost in thought that she didn't immediately notice the police cruiser behind her. When the blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror, Sarah's stomach tightened, an involuntary response she hated but couldn't control. Even after 2 decades as a lawyer, even as a federal judge, that flash of blue lights triggered something primal, something learned. She checked her speedometer, 63 and a 65. She wasn't speeding. She glanced at her turn signal, her brake lights, mentally inventorying every possible reason for the stop. Nothing. Everything on her vehicle was functioning properly. Registration current, insurance valid, inspection sticker fresh. Still, Sarah did exactly what she'd been taught to do. what she taught her own nephew to do, what every black parent in America teaches their children. She put on her hazard lights, signaled carefully, and pulled onto the shoulder of the highway, slowly, deliberately, making no sudden movements. She rolled down her window completely, placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, waited. In her rearview mirror, she watched 2 officers exit the cruiser. Both white, both male. One shorter, stocky with a buzz cut. He'd be Officer Brennan, she'd later learn. The other taller, leaner, with mirrored sunglasses. Officer Hayes. They didn't approach together. Hayes hung back by the cruiser, while Brennan walked toward her driver's side window with a swagger that Sarah had seen before. The walk of someone who knew he had power and intended to use it. Sarah took a breath. Stay calm, be respectful, get through this. She had no idea that in the next 20 minutes, everything she'd built, everything she believed about the system she'd devoted her life to, would be tested in ways she'd never imagined.
License and registration. Officer Brennan stood at her window, one hand resting on his service weapon, his eyes hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses, despite the morning sun being low on the horizon. "Good morning, officer," Sarah said, her voice steady and professional. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" "License and registration," he repeated, his tone hardening. "Now." Sarah felt the familiar calculation every black person knows. Comply or assert your rights. The constitutional law professor in her knew she had the right to ask why she'd been stopped. The black woman in her knew that asserting those rights could be dangerous. She chose compliance. "I'm going to reach into my glove compartment now to get my registration," she said clearly, narrating every movement. "Then I'll reach for my wallet in the center console." Brennan's hand tightened on his weapon. Slowly. Sarah moved with deliberate care, retrieving her documents and handing them through the window. As Brennan snatched them from her hand, Officer Hayes approached the passenger side of the vehicle, peering through the windows with a flashlight, despite the full daylight. "What are you doing on this highway?" Brennan demanded, studying her license. "I'm driving to Montgomery to visit my mother's grave. It's her birthday." "Where are you coming from?" "Birmingham. I live in Birmingham." "What do you do?" Sarah hesitated. In her experience, revealing her position as a judge could go one of 2 ways: immediate deference or increased hostility. She decided on partial truth. "I work for the federal court system." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "Doing what? You a secretary?" The insult was casual, almost reflexive. Sarah swallowed her response. "I'm an attorney." "Uh-huh." He studied her license again, then looked at her car, then back at her face. "This your vehicle?" "Yes." "You got proof of that?" "The registration you're holding shows my name as the registered owner." "Don't get smart with me," Brennan snapped. "I asked you if you have proof." Sarah's jaw tightened. The registration was proof. This wasn't about documentation. This was about something else entirely. "The registration certificate is the legal proof of ownership," Sarah said carefully. Hawes called from the passenger side. "Brennan, check this out." Brennan walked around the front of the car, and Sarah heard them conferring in low voices. Through her passenger window, she could see Hawes pointing at something in her back seat. It was her judicial reference books, a stack of law volumes she'd been meaning to return to her chambers. "Why do you have all these law books?" Brennan demanded, returning to her window. "I told you, I'm an attorney. I use them for research." "Or maybe you stole them." Hawes had joined Brennan at the driver's side now, both officers crowding her window. "Maybe you broke into a law office and stole these books. That would explain the fancy documents, the story about being a lawyer." Sarah's heart was pounding now, but she kept her voice level. "I didn't steal anything. Those books belong to me. If you'd like to verify my credentials, I can provide you with contact information for—" "Step out of the vehicle," Brennan ordered.
I'm sorry, what? I said, step out of the vehicle now. Officer, I've complied with everything you've asked. I've provided my license and registration. I've answered your questions. On what grounds are you ordering me out of my vehicle? It was the wrong thing to say. Sarah knew it the moment the words left her mouth. Brennan's face flushed red. On the grounds that I'm a police officer and I'm giving you a lawful order. Now get out of the damn car before I drag you out. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she unbuckled her seatbelt. This was escalating fast, spiraling beyond reason or procedure. She opened her door slowly and stepped out onto the shoulder of the highway. The wind from passing trucks whipped around her. The morning that had started with memories of her mother now felt surreal, nightmarish. Turn around, face the vehicle, hands on the hood. Sarah complied, placing her palms on the warm metal of her car hood. She felt Hawes's hands on her, patting down her cardigan, her waist, her pockets. The search was aggressive, invasive, unnecessarily rough. She's clean, Hawes reported. What about the vehicle? Brennan moved toward her open driver's door. I'm going to search your car. Do you have probable cause? The words came out before Sarah could stop them, the judge in her overriding the survival instinct. Brennan froze, then slowly turned to face her. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. What did you just say to me? I asked if you have probable cause to search my vehicle. Under the Fourth Amendment. I don't need a law lesson from some uppity... He caught himself, but the word hung in the air, unspoken, but understood. Brennan walked back to his cruiser and returned with something in his hand. A green bottle. Sarah's eyes widened. It was a beer bottle, Heineken, from the label. Found this in your vehicle, Brennan announced loudly, holding it up. That's not mine, Sarah said immediately. That was not in my vehicle. I don't drink beer. I've never had a beer bottle in my car. So now you're calling me a liar? Brennan stepped closer, invading her space, the bottle still raised between them. You're saying I planted this? Sarah's mind raced. This was it. The moment she'd read about in countless cases, the moment she'd ruled on from the bench but never experienced. Evidence fabrication. A pretext for arrest. I'm saying that bottle was not in my vehicle, and you know it. Hawes had his hand on his weapon now. Brennan, she's getting aggressive. I'm not aggressive. I'm standing still with my hands visible. I haven't threatened anyone. I haven't made any sudden movements. I have complied with every... Turn around, Brennan shouted. Hands behind your back. For what? What am I being charged with? Open container, DUI, resisting arrest. I haven't been drinking. You can test me right now. Breathalyzer, field sobriety, blood test. I will pass all of them because I haven't consumed any alcohol. But Brennan was already moving, grabbing her arm and wrenching it behind her back. Sarah gasped in pain as he twisted her wrist upward, forcing her off balance. You're hurting me, she managed. Officer, you're hurting me. Should have thought about that before you decided to mouth off, Brennan growled in her ear as cold metal closed around her wrists. Handcuffs. A federal judge in handcuffs on the side of a highway. Hawes was yelling something into his radio, requesting backup, calling for a tow truck, listing charges that Sarah knew were fabricated, baseless, designed to justify what they'd already decided to do the moment they saw a black woman in a car on this highway. Sarah's mind was screaming at her to tell them who she was, to end this nightmare with 3 words, I'm a judge. But another part of her, the part that had grown up in Montgomery, that had watched her mother be treated like she was invisible, that understood the deep roots of what was happening, that part wanted to see how far they would go, how far the system would let them go. You're making a mistake, she said quietly as Brennan walked her to the police cruiser. The only mistake here was yours, lady, Brennan replied, thinking you could come through here and disrespect us. As he pushed her head down and shoved her into the back seat of the cruiser, Sarah caught sight of her silver Honda on the shoulder, her mother's grave still 2 hours away, and she thought, "Mama, they still haven't learned. After everything, they still haven't learned."
The back seat of the police cruiser smelled like vomit and disinfectant. Sarah sat with her hands cuffed behind her, the metal digging into her wrists, watching through the metal grate as Brennan and Hayes stood by her vehicle, laughing about something. Her phone was still in her car, her purse, her identification beyond the driver's license Brennan had shoved in his pocket. Everything that could prove who she was, everything that could end this insanity, was out of reach. Through the windshield, she watched a tow truck arrive. They were really doing this. They were going to impound her vehicle, haul her to a police station, process her on fake charges, and drag her name through a system she devoted her life to believing in. The reality crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't about her being a judge. This was about her being black. If she'd revealed her position earlier, would it have mattered? Or would it have just made them angrier, more determined to prove they had power over her? Brennan pulled open the cruiser door and slid into the driver's seat. Hayes took the passenger side. Neither looked at her. "Booking's going to take a while," Brennan said conversationally to Hayes. "Might want to grab lunch after." "Sounds good. That Mexican place?" They were discussing lunch plans while a woman sat handcuffed behind them. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but hardening, crystallizing into something sharp and unforgiving. "Officer Brennan," she said, her voice cutting through their casual conversation, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." "Lady, you're under arrest. You don't get to talk anymore." "My name is Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. I am a federal judge for the Northern District of Alabama, appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. I have presided over more than 300 cases in the last 10 years, including multiple cases involving police misconduct." The cruiser went silent. Hayes turned around slowly in his seat, staring at her through the grate. "What did you just say?" Brennan's voice had lost its swagger. "I said I'm a federal judge. Judge Sarah Mitchell. You can verify this with a simple phone call to the Northern District Courthouse in Birmingham. You can Google my name and see my photograph on the court website. You can contact the U.S. Marshals Service, who provide security for me and my fellow judges." Brennan's face had gone pale. Hayes looked like he might be sick. "You're lying," Brennan said, but his voice was shaking. "You said you were an attorney." "I said I work for the federal court system. I'm an attorney. I'm also a judge. I chose not to disclose my full position because I wanted to see if you would follow proper procedure. If you would treat a citizen, any citizen, with basic dignity and respect." She leaned forward as far as the handcuffs would allow. "You failed that test spectacularly." Hayes was frantically typing on his phone. Sarah watched the blood drain from her face as he apparently found what he was looking for: her official photograph, her biography, proof that the woman they'd handcuffed was exactly who she said she was. "Brennan," Hayes whispered, showing him the phone screen. Brennan stared at it, then looked in the rearview mirror at Sarah, then back at the phone. His hands were shaking. This is a mistake. Your Honor, we didn't know." "You didn't know I was a judge," Sarah interrupted, her voice like steel. "But you should have known I was a human being. You should have known I deserved basic respect. You should have known that you can't plant evidence, fabricate charges, and violate constitutional rights just because you have a badge." "We can fix this," Brennan said desperately, already getting out of the cruiser. "We can make this go away. No charges, no record. We'll drive you back to your car." "And what?" Sarah demanded as he opened the back door to remove her handcuffs. "I'm supposed to just forget this happened? Move on like you didn't just demonstrate exactly why people don't trust the police? Like you didn't just prove that my nephew's fears every time he drives through this state are completely justified?" Her hands were free now, and she rubbed her wrists where the cuffs had left angry red marks. "You know what the worst part is?" She stepped out of the cruiser, facing both officers who now couldn't meet her eyes. "The worst part is that if I wasn't a judge, If I was just Sarah from Montgomery, daughter of a house cleaner with no title and no power, you would have finished this. You would have destroyed my life over a beer bottle you planted, and no one would have believed me over you." Brennan opened his mouth, but no words came out. "How many others?" Sarah asked quietly. "How many people have you done this to who didn't have the power to fight back?" The highway stretched behind them, empty and indifferent, as the question hung in the morning air.
Sarah drove herself to the station, not as a suspect, as a federal judge demanding a full investigation. By noon, she was seated in a conference room at the police department headquarters with the chief of police, a sweating captain, and two very nervous internal affairs officers. Brennan and Hayes' body camera footage was being reviewed, footage they'd forgotten to turn off, footage that captured everything. The planted beer bottle, the baseless search, the threats, the fabricated charges. All of it recorded in high definition. "Judge Mitchell," the police chief began, his voice carefully controlled, "I want to apologize on behalf of—" Sarah held up her hand. "Save your apologies, Chief Dawson. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to ensure this never happens again." She opened her briefcase and removed a stack of documents she'd prepared, quickly in the 2 hours since arriving at the station, but thoroughly. 2 decades of legal experience had taught her how to move fast. "I am formally requesting a Department of Justice investigation into this police department's practices, procedures, and patterns of discriminatory enforcement. I am also filing a civil rights lawsuit against Officers Brennan and Hayes individually and this department institutionally under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. The room went silent. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, her voice unwavering, "I am exercising my authority as a federal judge to request a review of every arrest made by Officers Brennan and Hayes in the last 5 years, every traffic stop, every search, every use of force incident. If they did this to me, a federal judge, imagine what they've done to people without my resources." Chief Dawson's jaw tightened. "Judge Mitchell, with all due respect, Chief, this is not a negotiation. This is a notification. The wheels of justice are already turning, and they will not stop until every instance of corruption, misconduct, and civil rights violation in this department is exposed and addressed." Over the next 6 months, the investigation Sarah Mitchell triggered would uncover a pattern of abuse that shocked even her. 47 wrongful arrests, dozens of planted evidence cases, a systematic targeting of Black and Latino drivers on that stretch of highway, text messages between officers containing racial slurs and jokes about teaching people their place. Officer Brennan was terminated and criminally charged with civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and false imprisonment. He would eventually plead guilty and serve 18 months in federal prison. Officer Hayes was terminated and lost his law enforcement certification permanently. He avoided jail time in exchange for his testimony against Brennan and 3 other officers involved in similar schemes. The police department entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice, requiring comprehensive reforms, including mandatory bias training, body camera protocols, and independent oversight. But for Sarah, the victory felt hollow. She attended 47 meetings with the victims whose cases had been overturned, people who'd lost jobs, custody of children, housing, opportunities, all because officers like Brennan had decided they were easy targets. She met Marcus, a 23-year-old black man who'd spent 2 years in prison for drug possession based on evidence that was later proven to have been planted. He'd lost his scholarship, his college acceptance, his future. She met Elena, a Latina mother of 3 who'd been arrested for outstanding warrants that didn't exist, who'd had her children taken by social services for 3 days before the mistake was discovered. She met dozens of others, each story a knife wound, each face a reminder that her experience had not been an aberration, it had been standard procedure. On what would have been her mother's birthday, a year after the traffic stop that changed everything, Sarah stood at the cemetery she'd been trying to reach that morning. "I shut down their department, Mama," she said to the gravestone. "I exposed everything. I made sure people knew." But as she stood there, watching the Alabama sun set over the same cotton fields her ancestors had worked, Sarah understood something that made her both proud and heartbroken. She had the power to get justice. Most people didn't. That traffic stop had ended with her vindication because she was a federal judge. But what about everyone else? What about every black driver pulled over on a lonely highway? Every Latino worker harassed for looking suspicious? Every person without a title, without connections, without the institutional power to fight back? The system had protected her because she was part of the system. The question that haunted her, the question she would spend the rest of her career trying to answer, was how to protect everyone else.